So there's kind of my personal history of gaming and my favorite games, but what does that mean in regards to writing and um, rhetoric of writing? So what it boils down to is, what do you write for when you're writing a video game? It used to be in the old days that as a writer, there really wasn't much you could do. You could describe a very basic 8-bit world. You could give textual explanations of what was happening on simple linear screens within that world. You wrote the storyline. That's all there was to it. But as games have shifted from these linear, simple stories that are defined by the technology that they had to work with, um, to these big postmodern freeform games with less plot and less linearity and much, much more crazy fluff stuff that's just there for entertainment's sake, there's a lot more writing possibilities and it's a lot more open-ended as to what you write about. You can still write a plot. You can still write a story, but you have to write a story that the gamers, the players themselves, can complete, um, that they can shape as they choose. You have to write 10 million quests for them to do, and then you have to write the systems that allow them to complete those quests. You have to make the game entertaining, and the gameplay has to be challenging and unusual. Um, and you have the opportunity to put your own silly nonsense into the game, because that's what can sometimes turn into a big inside joke, and everybody that plays WoW knows about this one little corner of this one little instance where this one little item usually drops, but it doesn't always drop. And we all know that frustration of going through the instance 20 million times and it never drops, and it's supposed to. As a writer, as a game writer, you don't even have to be a programmer, and you get to make that happen. Um, that's the audience you're writing for. And now with multiple online game players, it's even more important that what you write connects one person with many, because you're creating a world in which they have to interact. So, getting into game writing challenges, um, there's a lot of stuff that goes into writing a game that's not always fun. Um, you have to design the menus that hold the equipment so your character can carry their sword and their shield. Um, you have to lay out the interaction menus so that your character can equip magic and sell their items, and it may not sound like much, but if your fighting menus and your inventories and your infrastructure of the game is impractical and not intuitive, players won't play it, and they won't pay for it either. Um, Another challenge is having a plot without driving a plot. What's the goal of the game? Well, if the goal of the game is to beat the game so you can see the end sequence, then it's okay to have a linear plot. But more and more often, the game's goal is not seeing the end sequence, where you're not in any hurry to get there. And some games don't even have an ending anymore. Um, so you want to give players the option of, yes, there are things you can do and things that matter in this game, otherwise, why would you play it? You have goals that you're trying to reach, but you select which goals are important to you and how you're going to have your fun, because that's the end point of any game, is to have your fun. Um, you also want to continue inviting your players to be creative in their own right. So you can't have it so open-ended that your players don't know what to do. I mean, there are it helps to only be able to play certain kinds of characters: dwarves, elves, humans, and halflings. There's your four choices, because if you gave them any choice of anything they could possibly think up, people would just kind of go, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed and this is too much work. I don't want to have to think that much." Um, but you want them to be able to customize those characters as much as possible within your framework. And that's really what it's all about, is creating a framework more and more, rather than um, creating a story. So the Midgar project is an example of an actual attempt to write an RPG that is meant for probably a console, although it may go PC. It really depends on, by the time we've got the framework built, which system is more likely to um, support the programming that's going to have to take place. What we're going for is a RPG in the tradition of Final Fantasy. Um, we want an anti-heroic set of characters, and so they're not trying to save the world, or if they do manage to save the world, it's sort of by accident or only because they have to. And we want a lot of side plots and the freedom to make choices within the game that affect the game's ending. So it will probably be somewhat linear, but just for the sake of moving things forward, but it's not like it'll always be the same way every time. There'll be a lot of alternate endings, and the player's choices affect the characters in the game. The goal of the game will be shaped by those choices. So the end game and what you're trying to do in the game, you choose, essentially. I mean, obviously you're trying to have fun, but if you're trying to save the world, you choose that based on choices you make throughout the game. Um, so we want big generics. We want to, as writers, have in mind this theme of man versus God that we're trying to create within the framework of the game, but it's the player in the individual scenes that actually makes the action happen and actually makes that play out. We also have, the idea of just NPC bookmarks, uh, kind of like the journal in Morrowind. This just sort of helps when you've got a huge open-ended game. You need something to keep track of what you've done and what you're working on and what your options are at this point. So why do it? Why write a game? Besides, I love it and I'd love to contribute something to the culture that's given me so much uh, entertainment. And not just add to it, but maybe expand the awareness of it the way that Final Fantasy changed the way I thought about games. I'd like to change the way people think about games, not just as in making just another really good RPG, but if I could push it just a little bit further and do something with this genre that people thought, well, it's dead, nobody can do anything with it anymore. If I could push it in a direction that said that there is something more to this, and things can still be done with RPGs without making them MMORPGs, that would really excite me. But then again, I'd just be happy with a good old-fashioned RPG that everybody liked too. Um, and again, I want something that users can express their own ideas through. They'll understand what we were trying to say as writers, or at least have an idea of what the main message was of the themes. They'll be able to build on our framework and understand that framework and interface with that framework comfortably, and they'll enjoy doing it. I guess the best case scenario, at least as far as publicity and cultural impact, is the all your bases. I guess I say even phenomenon. It's an example of bad publicity, but it was one of those cultural impacts that just it expanded outside of the gamer community. It was on the cover of Time there for a while. I can't remember back when. It was several. I think it was at least in 97, 98. It was a while back. But anyway, check out the link. That it says more than I ever could. And anyway, so I hope you got an idea today of the history of my personal history of gaming and the challenges of writing a video game and how they apply